Restorers, thanks for checking out a super exciting, very special edition of the Restoration Today podcast. I am joined by three people who have been repeat guests on my podcast before, and now I get to have all three of them together in one place, which is very exciting. And I think this is going to be a huge thing for the industry. This is a big partnership that we're about to reveal here. So I am joined by the restoration lawyer himself, Ed Cross. I am also joined by Anthony Nelson, who is a frequent C&R contributor. He's with Pivot My Business these days, and also doing some other consulting. He does a lot with custom price lists. And I am joined by Mike Fulton, who is the immediately former president of Xactware. He was there for 30 years, and I've had him on the podcast in the past. He's also been in a lot of discussions within the industry about pricing and contractors getting paid and Xactimate price lists, all of these things. And now they're here together, which is very exciting. So if you can see their backgrounds, you see that there's something in common in all of the backgrounds. So I am going to toss it over to Ed to kind of spill the beans on what this means, why these three men are together in the same place at the same time with the same background and what's going on. So Ed, take it away.
Thank you very much, Michelle. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you for everything that you do for the industry. As some people know, earlier this year, I formed a consulting group called Restoration CrossCheck. And the reason for this basically is that I found that restorers have the will to bring the restoration companies to the next level, but they don't always have the power. And I was fortunate enough to develop a number of relationships with some very, very shrewd experts in the industry who were willing to lend some of their time and talent to help restorers kind of improve their systems, improve their best practices, and help them withstand some of the incredible challenges that are faced by the industry today. And so I formed this group of prominent restoration and insurance industry experts, and they have proven track records growing restoration companies and working in the trenches to basically overcome these pain points, these challenges that we see so often. The vision of the operation is basically to make the world a better place for restorers in light of all of the increasing business pressures. And we do that by providing guidance and education and tools and expert mentorship to professionals who are in the restoration ecosystem. And one of the big keys to it is that these people, this team of all-stars that I've assembled, they have recent experience actually in the trenches. And I'm absolutely overjoyed and delighted to announce to the industry today that Mr. Mike Fulton, who has been doing some independent consulting across the restoration industry since leaving Verisk, has now joined the Restoration CrossCheck team to focus his efforts on the restoration side of the business through this channel. And as many of you know, Mike was with Verisk, the company that publishes Xactimate, for 30 years, 7 years of which as president. And really one of his main areas of focus there is building cost data, estimating and pricing. And one of the big things that Restoration CrossCheck does is we provide customized restoration price list services that are designed by Anthony Nelson. I couldn't think of anybody better to be involved in this process than Mr. Mike Fulton. Who knows more about restoration industry pricing and estimating than Mike Fulton? And in the meetings that we've had where Mike has been going over our customized price list service and the science behind it, I've had a chance to listen to him talk to Anthony, and the level and sophistication that these two men have. They've both dedicated their lives to this topic, and it's going to make it sharper and better. And I'd like to thank Mike very much and welcome him to the Restoration CrossCheck team today.
Perfect. I love it. Okay. So Mike, I'm going to toss it to you next to introduce yourself. Ed shared a little bit of your background, but share a little bit more because you are really familiar with the contractor space. You weren't just in the software space. Like you really understand all of this well. So share a little bit more about your background. Go a little bit deeper into how well you understand the contractor and your background.
Sure. Thank you, Ed. Those very, very kind of you for those comments. Very, very flattering, and hope I can live up to them. So Mike Fulton here. Many of you know my name, have seen the face and heard me talk in different areas. And I've been involved in this industry for well more than 30 years. 30 years of it was with the Xactware organization, but prior to that, 10 years just as an independent general contractor, and I still remain licensed today. So this is in my blood. I used to say when I was with Xactware, if you cut me, I bleed X's. But at some point, I'm bleeding nails for the construction industry. I think number one, Ed said it very well when he said the goal of the Restoration CrossCheck group is to make the world a better place. This is a great industry in which we all reside. I've talked in front of large groups before and said, it's how many industries people can probably think of a lot. I focus on this industry, but when you think of the different players, the different stakeholders in the restoration industry, the property claims industry in North America, at least, and probably throughout the world, a lot of different businesses with different business goals, different strategies behind them. But in the end, everybody has the same goal, right? It's to take this particular homeowner who has unfortunately, suffered, quite a difficult situation and make them whole, put them back in their home and get them taken care of as quickly as possible. And that's where it all comes together and dovetails together. So as I left Verisk, I wanted to stay within the industry. This is in my blood, as Ed said, and I said, and I've been doing a number of consulting work, works with different groups across the industry, from insurers, TPAs, VC firms, et cetera, all focused on just that, making the world a better place at the big picture. But, when Ed called me and reached out to me a few weeks ago and, kind of introduced the Restoration CrossCheck team, and that said, this is a really unique channel that focuses on this side of the industry. And it gives me an opportunity to just really direct my efforts towards the restoration contractor side of the industry through this channel. I think it's extremely beneficial for me. My background, again, I remain in the construction industry very, very solidly throughout my 30 years with Verisk. The majority of that time I spent leading the team that builds and researches and analyzes and publishes all the building cost data for North America and the rest of the planet that we worked with within that group. So that's in my blood. That's what I really enjoy doing, and also heavily invested in the technology side, but just in estimation and property claims in general. And there's a lot to be done yet, and probably always will be, just with regard to education and communication. And, while Restoration CrossCheck is focused on the restorer side of the industry, so much to be done on all sides of the industry. I am heavily vested in this. I'm excited about it. Was really glad that Ed reached out to me and that we were able to work this out. So it's going to be fun.
It'll be fun. Okay, Anthony, I want you to kind of introduce yourself as well, because you have contractor experience. Now you're on the consultant side as well with Pivot My Business and working with Restoration CrossCheck. And you've also been deeply involved in developing custom price lists for some time. I think that, I don't know, did this start as a hobby for you? But, just yesterday I was proofing part 2 of your article with all of your math on how to do a lot of this. That's going to be in the next issue of C&R. So people should look out for that. It's a 2-part series that's really going to help you with some of these calculations, and it's really well thought out. So how did this start for you? Was it a hobby as a contractor? How did you gain the breadth of knowledge that you have today on this?
It was born out of the frustration of trying to run a profitable business in Hawaii, which in general, it doesn't matter if, where the vertical is, it's just harder to run a profitable business in Hawaii. We always refer to the paradise tax. Well, contractors are not exempt from the paradise tax. We still have to pay that tax. Really what I've always tried to do is find the middle ground in all of this, right? You'll ask me questions and I'll be like, here's what I don't want you to do. I don't want you to apply a 20% markup blanketly across the entire price list, because that's not reflective of actual costs. And it really doesn't help further the agenda of, making things customized from Xactimate. And so my passion in this has been 2 parts, right? Number one, providing a turnkey service, recognizing the fact that most contractors don't have the time to do this correctly and well. but also education, making sure that the contractors who want to stick their toe in the water or are getting frustrated in their market have the tools and resources necessary available to them to go do it well, as opposed to just saying, I need more and making that it.
Yes. Okay. Mike, really quick, what is your take? I know you and I have talked about this on past podcasts, so people can go back and watch other discussions that you and I have had, but just share for people who aren't familiar your view of custom price lists and where that the role of that within the industry on the contractor side, especially.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, well, to start with, I think what Verisk offers is a very good service. I mean, you need some level of a default, and I call it a default price list. Some people call it a standardized price. I don't like that, but it's really a default, a place from which you can begin. I mean, there's 18,000 roughly line items within that price list. For any individual restorer to go out and develop his or her own price list with that quantity, that scale is not going to happen. But you and I have had discussions, and within the industry, we've had discussions with contractors about the quote unquote right price. What is the right price for a job, for a unit of work? And you know, the comment I've always come back with is, what's the right price for a gallon of milk? What's the right price for a used car in your market? Or if you go to buy a new pair of shoes or a new suit or anything else, it's some meeting between the buyer and seller of what do you really want? What is the buyer willing to, what's the buyer willing to pay with regard to quality and service? What's the seller willing to provide for that as well? And that's variable. I mean, you shop around for OSB at different suppliers. It's variable because they have their own business, their own needs, their own competitive needs, et cetera. So do contractors. So does anybody that's in business for it. And it's variable. And each job is variable. It's not like the auto industry where, you know, I'm working in a controlled environment in my shop that's heated in the winter and air conditioned in the summer, and my tools are never more than 20 feet away, and the parts are always delivered to my door, you know, a couple of times a day. It's every home is unique. They don't have a finite number of parts with a finite number of make and models that are out there. And contractors need to be able to adjust where appropriate. And Verisk, I can't speak for other software providers, still learning about those quite a bit. But, you know, Verisk has always promoted the fact that what they're providing from a cost perspective is a default, but it's up to each individual estimator to ensure, number one, that those prices are accurate for the job, and number two, for their particular business and for the consumer for whom they're providing that service. And so I think it's critical for people to understand that that's the stand, that's the basis from which they operate. Number two, from a contractor's perspective, and unfortunately, this goes to the education and communication side of it with regard to what Anthony is doing is so beneficial. I don't care what business you're in. If you're selling hot dogs, if you don't know what your costs are to provide a thing, and you don't know what your competitors are charging, you're not going to be successful. So it's critical that people get into the nuts and bolts of these things, and they don't have to for 18,000 line items. That's ridiculous. That's an unattainable scale. But, you know, for the top items for which they do business, and when you get beyond the top 100 line items used within Xactimate, and I assume it's the same with any other provider, you know, the probability, at least in the last reports analysis that I had done, the probability of any one of those other line items, those 17,900 line items being used, drops to less than 2%. So they're just very seldomly used. Most of them are going to be in those top 100, those most used items. And that's where I think people need to focus their efforts. So I think it's beneficial. I think there is certainly a place, and always will be, for a provider of default pricing to assist people. But I think people, individual restorers, and frankly, the insurance community as well, understanding the difference out there in the market and why they need to have the ability to adjust for certain conditions is critical. And that's what this team is all about.
Okay, so for restorers listening to this saying, okay, this is all great and custom price lists, yes, but adjusters still don't like it. Mike, I'll toss this to you first, but I'm kind of interested in how each of you would answer the question of, I'm getting pushback from an adjuster on my price list. What should I do? How do I respond to pushback? So Mike, I'll toss it to you first, but I would like each of you to answer that.
Sure. From my perspective, it's all about education and then communication based upon that. So if if I've got, let's say that, for example, a publisher of cost data, and it doesn't have to be Verisk, it can be any of the others, publishes a price of $1 for a thing. And I feel like price needs to be $1.25 or $1.50 or $2. You know, for me to just say the price needs to be this holds a certain level of weight to it. But for me to say the price needs to be this, and here's why, here's all the breakdown of my costs and how I can support that, is a completely different level. And I think those contractors, those restorers that have been successful in getting those adjustments made are the ones that can have that intelligent conversation and have the data to back it up, which is why what Anthony is doing is so critical. He's getting down to that nth level of detail. So it's not just what Xactware / Verisk does to say, for a default perspective, here's what we assume for labor productivity and a labor rate at prevailing wage in that area, how quickly they can install plywood, et cetera. But it's what do you, Michelle Blevins Restoration, what do you need to do for your particular business based upon your operation goals and so on. And I think that's what's critical. And I think that's, in my mind at least, Anthony, I'll turn it over to you. But in my mind, that communication, that understanding, and that data is what's key to helping those that are successful at that be so.
Yeah, Anthony, go for it.
It's probably the number one question I get about customized pricing. When the adjuster says no, what do I do? Mm-hmm. And usually, if they're a customer of ours and they're using our service, I tell them, you got to ask why. Okay, I hear you, Mr. and Mrs. Adjuster, but tell me why. Where's the objection to me changing this price? And, if you're providing supporting collateral, the answer is usually one of two things. Usually they're like, well, and then they look at what you've prepared. And by and large, a majority of adjusters go, okay, I kind of get it. I understand it. It makes sense. I'm going to go ahead and approve this estimate. There is still a section of adjusters who look at it and go, well, I can't allow contractors to deviate from Xactimate or insert your estimating platform of choice pricing. And still then the question is why? And I have, there's all the arguments of, hey, well, everybody else in your market is using said software pricing, or, those standard arguments. And this is where, Mike is really instrumental in his vision of how pricing comes together is, look, like, what's the price of a gallon of milk, right? Mm-hmm. Like, that's a fair question. If you ask me, when, even in my family, like when I go to Whole Foods and I buy milk, like, is it for me? Because I'll drink, the vitamin D toxic waste soup that comes out of some weird factory. But if it's for my 2-year-old, no, like, it's the Whole Foods grass-fed $9 a quart, like goat milk or whatever my wife says we should be feeding the kid, like the need changes. So I think the rule applies to contractors. And really what I tell contractors is, hey, don't get frustrated, get curious. Try and understand the other side of the fence. By and large, the reason why that adjuster is telling you that they're not going to pay it is because their boss said, hey, this is how you should do it. And so flip that on its head, say, hey, look, I'm a project manager, I'm an estimator. I have to, if you're going to tell me no, I need an answer to give my boss. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the times adjusters understand that. They're like, oh, crap, that makes sense. Okay. And so it just creates a road of collaboration as opposed to the stalemate of no, go pound sand.
Sure.
I would also add, if I could just interject on that, because I think what Ed said is right in line, is that when you think of these building cost data providers, their promotion, their research, their market research for building costs relies heavily on people feeding them information on what costs are out in the field. And if contractors, restorers, adjusters, et cetera, are just, for lack of a better term, regurgitating back what that group published, it's not getting updated as it should. And typically what an adjuster, even though an adjuster may be saying, hey, I'm not going to pay anything more than what Xactware offers for this particular price in this particular market at this time, effectively what they're saying is, there's several other people out there that are willing to do it for this price. Mm-hmm. And it's because there's several other people that don't understand what their costs are as well. And so if the more education that we can offer to the market about what people's costs are, what their competitors are charging, so that they can do that on their own, then that data comes back to these providers. It makes the default price list, the default rates, even better. Not to say that they wouldn't have to vary from them ever, but it makes that whole process work. That's the way it's designed.
Place I see contractors get themselves in trouble so many times is if they customize a price and the adjuster comes back with questions, they don't have supporting documentation. They don't have a good rationale as to why they did it. And one thing that I think is so brilliant about Anthony's customized price list program is that for each Xactimate price that he changes, he provides the actual calculations. So for example, if the program presumed that the labor wage the contractor was paying was $20, but the contractor can't find that work for less than $23, then Anthony changes it to $23. And I learned something that was pretty amazing. If you change just the rate for painting, it impacts 520 different line items in Xactimate. So these are really huge things. If you are charging a different material price than what may be shown in some published price data, you need to provide, for example, some links to some local big box stores to show what your cost is. And what we find is that if an adjuster gets a link to the local Lowe's or Home Depot where you're buying your materials, and it shows that material for that particular zip code, and it's a different price from what's in a generic price list, then they're receptive to that. And it's a lot of work to come up with that. And Anthony has created a machine to generate all that. And I really think it's going to be revolutionary.
Mike, I love that you keep saying default price list versus like, this isn't universal. This isn't, you don't have to accept it across the board, right? You know, I think of defaults as in everybody buys a new computer and they come with default settings, but nobody leaves the settings on their computer as they are. It depends on setting them for what you need them to be. So I think that default terminology is a really good way to look at it. So, all right. So for people listening, thinking, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This could really help me, you know, customize my price list, get paid in a different way, maybe more wholly than I feel like we have been. What are the next steps? How can contractors kind of embrace this partnership that you all are forging here and learn and pull knowledge from you?
So if you go to Restoration CrossCheck /prices, you'll see an explanation of what we do. And there's a form in there to fill out where you would provide your labor wages to us. And we can take a look at that and have a conversation about what is going to help your company the most. And we're not looking to carpet bomb any price lists. We are looking to make price lists more accurate. And in some instances, the customized price that Anthony comes up with may actually be less than the Xactimate price. And that's showing integrity, and it increases the credibility along the way. And so we get those numbers, we create a PLX file that we send over that can be uploaded and used in Xactimate. And then there is a spreadsheet that goes with each of the labor rates that got changed, showing the math. You know, like in fourth grade, your teacher would say, show your work on your math problems. Well, that's actually what we're doing. It's not numbers pulled out of the air. It's not arbitrary. It's not random. It's like, here are the reasons why. This is what my labor rates are. This is what my material rates are. And we've got the supporting documentation that goes with that, as long as a very helpful instructional video by Anthony Nelson.
Perfect. Okay. So I would love for each of you to share success stories of contractors that you're aware of who have gone the custom price list route and maybe even forged good relationships with adjusters who now understand their price list. And then in addition to that, are now maybe their margins are better. They feel like they're getting paid more fairly. You know, we're not trying to overinflate our prices or be unfair, but are getting paid more fairly across the board. So I don't know who wants to take that first, but I'd love to hear some success stories so contractors know this is possible. This isn't way out in left field that you're not going to be able to achieve this.
Yeah, I'll start, and then I'll throw it over to Anthony and Mike if he wants to comment as well. So I recently got an email from one of our customers who've been using the customized price list system and the data and supporting documentation we provided. And to my joy, he said he's received 0 pushback. because he's providing the support. He's providing the reasons for what he's doing. And of course, that's really valuable. Somebody was talking to an adjuster. There's a restorer who was talking to an adjuster and explained that he was thinking about customizing his prices. He kind of floated the idea with this adjuster. And the adjuster's response was, well, as long as you do it in the way that Anthony Nelson does it, we'll have no problem with it. And it's like, wow. And so that gave our new client their comfort level in what we were doing. Anthony?
Yeah. So in my experience, but there's no silver bullet, unfortunately, right? But the success stories that I've heard have been, as long as the documentation is sufficient, and I work with, I talk to just about anybody who will listen to me talk about customized pricing. So those are our customers. And then, just other folks in the industry who are customizing pricing on their own. They are starting to find success because in the marketplace, there seems to be quality issues with the bucket of contractors that are adhering to the default prices. And so that tends to be a good argument to have, like, hey, look, I'm not doing this because it's easy. It's actually hard. And part of the reasons is so then that way I can differentiate myself as a higher quality service provider for what we do. To Ed's point, of the customers that we have for the customized price list service, I'm very edgy when we sign somebody up, because I'm like, man, I really hope it works. I want everybody to get it and it just goes smooth. And by and large, that has been the response. When we launched this, I prepared myself to be on the phone and talking with people and coaching people and helping them, answer those questions that they're getting from adjusters. And we haven't had a ton of them. There have been a few, right? There's always a few, but way less than I would have guessed.
That's awesome. Mike, anything that you want to add? Any success stories you've heard?
Yeah, a couple of points. I mean, you mentioned, and I mentioned the default price list. You mentioned your computer, and how often do you leave those defaults in place? Not to deter from the value of that. I mean, I'm sure your computer, to use that example, probably has thousands, certainly hundreds of defaults that it comes with. You're likely not changing all of them. You're changing the ones that are important to you. But the whole idea of a default is that this is what a majority of the people need, that we found all of the time, or what works the majority of the time. So I still think there's benefit in that. But going forward, I mean, there's a shift happening in the property claims industry, been going on for quite a while, where there's just certainly a demographic shift in adjusters that have the construction savvy, old guys like me that are retiring, and the new group that's coming in, they want to, they're used to texting each other across the dinner table like this, and this is how they want to estimate. And insurers have, expense ratios they're trying to maintain. Things are going up incredibly quickly. And how do they maintain their rates quickly enough to adjust for those claims costs that are coming in? And one of the ways is they're trying to shift and move towards desk adjusting, which works really well. But the difficult part of that for the restorer is it's more difficult for he or she to have a good working relationship. And from that working relationship, trust is developed with those individuals. That is, somebody sitting at a desk 350 miles away who you've only met virtually, maybe on a Zoom call, but more often than not, just on an audio call. So trust is key. Anthony mentioned early on is, the why. Why are we doing this? Why are you forcing me to use this price? Or how do I respond and say, why do I need it to be different, is critical. And I think that's part of the education piece, certainly why Restoration CrossCheck is so invaluable on the restorer side of the community. We need to do more on the adjuster side of the community as well. But, those that have had success in the past, from what I've seen with regard to customizing prices, have been those that have established that level of trust with the adjuster. They know that there's someone that's going to provide quality work. They know that there's someone who can frankly be called in to fix someone else's problem on a claim, and that they will do it correctly and they'll do it right, and they're there for them, and they've been there for them, and they'll be there for them for the next several years, indefinitely, to continue to service their work. And adjusters are looking for education as well. They want to understand, and that's why it's critical for them. But I think the trust is key. More difficult to get in today's day and age with the virtual nature of how we communicate. And some, I mean, I'm cautious about how to promote this, but some have said one of the best ways they've been able to establish that trust is to just say no, for a job. That's a difficult thing to do, and then you end up coming back and fixing it. But you've got to be able to establish that level of trust with folks, and once they trust you, they will understand and certainly allow those things. That's what I've seen in the past.
So for people who are anxious to hear more from all three of you, I think all three of you are going to be together relatively soon, maybe in a few weeks out in the desert. So Ed, talk a little bit about what's coming up in a few weeks at the experience and how people can get involved in that.
Sure. Restoration CrossCheck is putting on a special pre-convention workshop in Las Vegas before the Experience Convention. The workshop is going to be on September 5th. It's called Strategic Strikes to Accelerate Your Restoration Business. It's a full-day workshop, and it includes the sorts of decisive guidance and education and mentorship that we think is very necessary for restorers to have and to help catapult their businesses to the next level. We're going to be walking through in detail. Anthony's going to be laying out the steps that he takes to customize a restoration price list so you can do it yourself. You don't need to buy it from us. You can do it yourself, and he's going to show you how. We're going to be digging deep into adjuster relations and negotiations, and a number of very helpful strategies that are taught by Jeff Taxier, who is one of our insurance claims experts. He was with Allstate for 35 years. We're going to be going pretty deep into project management and documentation. We're going to get into risk management. We're going to talk about client control. Norma Valley, the tool belt diva, is a client control expert. We're going to have Mark Pasculi, who's a successful 20-year restoration contractor, as well as a lawyer and a CPA. He's going to be covering things like business management, fiscal health assessment, and how to balance your mitigation and your reconstruction work. So I'm very happy and overjoyed that Mike Fulton is going to be there with us as a presenter to provide his feedback and input and expertise from his decades of experience on all of these really, really important topics. So we hope everybody will check out experiencetheevents.com and take a look at the pre-convention workshop. And you're going to hear presentations from me, Mike Fulton, Mark Pasculi, Jeff Taxier, Anthony Nelson, and none other than Norma Valley, the tool belt diva.
Love it. Okay. Anything else that any of you want to add before we wrap it up? We've talked about a lot here. I know that there's a lot more to come. This is big, very exciting news. Mike, it's exciting to have you back kind of in the forefront of the industry again. Welcome back. You weren't gone very long, less than 6 months.
Thank you.
Retirement and golfing was a little short-lived, but that's okay. I love it. Anything else that any of you want to add before we wrap it up? No.
I would like to remind everybody that the Xactimate user license agreement says that any users of that platform agree not to prohibit someone else from deviating from the prices that are there. If you're on a program, that's a different sort of contractual agreement that you have, but insurance companies should not be prohibiting overrides. They should not be trying to force contractors working independently on projects to comply or conform to any particular price structure. They need to pay what's reasonable, and that may or may not be a standard price. It has to be reasonable. Reasonable is what's fair and customary given all of the circumstances that Mike has spoken of, including the contractor's target margins. And if you provide a higher level of service, you're entitled to a higher fee.
Beautiful. Okay. Mike, Anthony, anything else? Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being here. Especially, we're recording this on a Saturday. For people who are watching it, you'll see it a couple days from now when we're recording it, but all different time zones happening here from Hawaii to the East Coast. So we're all over the place, but thank you very much for being here. Congrats to each of you. Have fun in Vegas, and I look forward to chatting with all of you soon.
Thank you very much, Michelle.
Thanks so much, Michelle.
For more Restoration Today and the latest news, visit our website, cnrmagazine.com, and find the latest episodes of the Restoration Today podcast on your favorite podcasting platform.